Now, live for another week of The Lunchroom. I see folks joining us. Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to another Tuesday afternoon episode of The Lunchroom. We're so happy to have you and have a couple of special guests up our sleeve for today's episode. As always, I'm Sarah Schofield-Manser. I'm ART's Assistant Director of Special Events and Partnerships. I use the she, her series of pronouns. I am a white woman with dark brown hair pulled back in a little bun situation today. Today I cracked out my favorite spring blouse. It's like a little leopard print and makes me feel springy for whatever reason. And I am wearing headphones. I do want to acknowledge that I am today calling in from the unceded territory of the Massachusetts, Pentucket, Wabanaki, and Pennacook peoples, and that the land occupied by the Low Drama Center and Oberon is the unceded territory of the Massachusetts people. Get a few Zoom housekeeping notes before we get into our conversation today. The first is that the chat is disabled, so you will not be able to communicate with our panelists or with myself using the chat. The second is that we've reserved the last 15 minutes of the hour to answer your questions. So if you'd like to submit questions for our panelists, please do so using the Q&A feature along the very bottom of your screen. Another thing to note at the bottom of your screen, if you prefer to follow along with live subtitles, you can turn those on by pressing a little icon that has 3 buttons. It says More. It should give you an option to show subtitle or live transcript. Turn that on and you can follow along at home. They're not perfect. They're Zoom auto-generated, but they're pretty good. So also let us know if you've got some user experience with that. If you're liking them or not, we're always welcoming feedback from the lunchroom. And last but certainly not least, I do want to read an audience expectation statement. And I need to say that the ART is unequivocally opposed to hate and centers anti-racism as a core value. We expect everyone in the ART community, including you, our audiences, to uphold these values. And as such, we will not tolerate anti-Blackness or racism of any kind in our buildings nor at our online events. We aim to create an environment that is inhabitable to racism and discrimination, where all BIPOC staff, artists, volunteers, audience, and community members are seen, heard, valued, and provided the opportunity to thrive. This work is only possible when we do it together, and thank you for being our partner in it. Without further ado from there, I would love to invite Terrie and Bradley Bloom Artistic Director Diane Paulus to join me on screen. Diane, how are you?
I am great. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, nice to see you.
Yes, happy to be here, and I'm so excited for our conversation today. Hi to everybody who's tuning in and listening. I'm Diane, Artistic Director at ART. I use the she series of pronouns. I am zooming in from the ancestral homeland of the Lenape people. And I am Asian American. I have dark brown hair, green eyes, wearing my glasses on my head, which I will use occasionally to read some things today. Wearing a blue shirt, trying to get into the spring colors here, and so looking forward to welcoming Michael. I'm gonna launch by reading you his bio, and then we will invite Michael to join us. So Michael J. Bobbitt is a director, choreographer, and playwright who has dedicated his professional career to arts leadership. He previously served as the artistic director of the New Repertory Theater in Watertown, Mass., and the Adventure Theater MTC in Maryland. He has served as associate professor of theater at Boston Conservatory at Berkeley and volunteered on numerous nonprofit boards. Michael has directed and choreographed at theaters across the country. As a writer, his work was chosen for the New York City International Fringe Festival and the New York and Musical Theater Festival. His plays are published by Concord Theatricals, Rogers and Hammerstein Theatricals, Broadway Publishing, and Plays for Young Audiences. Michael has received the Excel Leadership Award from the Center for Nonprofit Advancement, the County Executive Excellence in the Arts and Humanities Emerging Leadership Award, Maryland Theater Guide's Person of the Year Award, and on February 1st, 2021, he joined Mass Cultural Council as Executive Director, becoming the highest ranking cultural official in Massachusetts. So without further ado, Michael, will you join us?
I'm going to see myself out. Nice to see both of you. I'll see you at the end of the conversation.
Good to see you, Sarah. Hi, Diane. So good to see you again. Great to see you.
You too. Thank you for making the time at what I imagine is a a very busy schedule for you with your new responsibilities.
Sure. It's like drinking from a fire hose, I tell people. Lots of information coming in. And I think the hardest thing is that I'm trying to memorize all these acronyms that happen in government. So many acronyms, but I'm getting close. But thank you for inviting me here. I should just introduce myself. I use the he series pronouns. And for anyone who has vision impairments, I am wearing a gray shirt. I am a Black man with a shaved head and a closely cropped beard with a pair of glasses on. I'm in my son's room now because he's off to college at the University of Florida, and there's great contemporary art that my husband and I that we collect. And I'm also coming from only 4 blocks away from the Loeb Center on the land of the Massachusetts people. So I am a Cambridge guy, and ART is right around the corner for me. But I'm just so happy to hang out with you and to catch up with you some more.
Likewise. And I do want to mention that this is a return of Michael to the lunchroom. You were kind enough to join us last September. And while that was a great conversation about your past as an artist, I'm super eager to focus on your new life now in government and what that transition has meant for you. But yes, Sarah is going to put into our chat for anybody who wants to learn more about Michael. You can watch the archive of the prior lunchroom. But I thought we could launch with what this has meant for you to pivot to a position of leadership that is not running an arts institution, but representing the arts in our civic space. And had that ever been a dream of yours, a thought of yours, and how is it going?
It came out of the blue. Not my passion for representing the community at large, because I always felt that even when I was running an organization, what I was doing in the building was for the community. And so I had to be as involved with the whole community as possible. One, to get people to come into the space, but 2, to get the space to expand beyond the walls. But when the search firm first reached out, I was like, no, thank you. I'm not interested. I'm happy. I'm doing great things and things are happening. And then after a couple of prods, I met with the executive director of the search firm, and he sat me down and said, hey, here are the things I know you like to do in your life. What I'm saying to you is you can do these things for a whole state. And so that just appealed to me in such a huge way. I had lots of experiences in the sort of granting world, which is one of the programs that Mass Cultural Council does, by sitting on numerous grant panels in both state and local, and the NEA a few times. And I also was one of those people that got super involved in the advocacy for the arts, being on the board of one major arts advocacy group, Maryland Citizens for the Arts, and also for the Arts and Humanities Council of Montgomery County, which is just outside of DC. So I sort of knew that world. I spent much time in Montgomery County building relationships with the legislation, both on the local and the state level. And even when I got here, part of my last spring and summer was really getting to know the legislation, because I figured that was going to be a great way to advance new rep. So all those things I'd been doing, I didn't know would lead me to the job, and I'm just really having a blast. It's so much to learn and so much to think about. And right now, as we are trying to figure out how we come back after COVID and deal with the racial reckoning, I'm spending so much time learning about what we do as an agency, but also learning about what the state needs, what the country needs, and not just for like organizations, but for artists as well. And I'm also spending quite a bit of time reading about what's happening internationally to see if there are ideas that we can bring here too. So a lot of information, a lot of reading, a lot of thinking.
I'm wondering if we could maybe start diving in on this conversation of recovery and reopening. I think it maybe with the coming of the spring now, it just feels like we're a little bit closer to actually in our industry allowing ourselves to contemplate what it might mean to return. You know, I think there's been so many moments in this marathon of this pandemic where we've just had to build a scenario and then throw it away. So it's almost like there's a response of not hoping too much, that anything's going to be possible. But I do feel it's now maybe in our near future. It's in sight. And of course, there's so many things to consider about what it's going to mean to return. I wonder if you could speak a little bit about how you're thinking of what the arts means for recovery, both intrinsic impact and also as part of our economic revival in Massachusetts. I mean, any thoughts on that in terms of how you're thinking?
Yeah, well, it's, right now there's so much information coming in. I'm trying to organize it all and figure out what the plan looks like. But there is I was just running an arts organization only a few months ago. So thinking about what does it mean for that theater to reopen? And I think at New Rep, I at least stopped building scenario plans because it just didn't make any sense without any sort of end in sight. Right. And sort of spending more of my time focusing on what the theater looks like post-pandemic that's new, that's different than what we were doing before. Right. So, I've been thinking about what would happen if we were to build a cultural economic recovery plan, and could that become somewhat of an economic boom for the state? I think about what happened in New York in the late 1970s and the early 1980s when New York was really struggling with money and almost going bankrupt. And they sort of built this collective impact of travel, transportation, hotel, entertainment, tourism, restaurants, anyone that sort of that would benefit from this economic boom. They got together and to figure out what to do. And what they did was they centered the arts in the middle of their plan. Do you remember that I Love New York campaign?
Yeah. Well, before that, it was Ford to City Drop Dead. That was the time. Yeah. And then I Love New York, right?
Yeah. And at the center of that was dancing cats and chorus boys in gold suits dancing because the arts can bring it back. And even in New Orleans after Katrina, they centered the jazz festival to get people to come back. So, we all know, all of us that attend the arts and support, especially the performing arts, know that when you go to see a show, you maybe buy a new dress, you get your hair done, you get your nails done, you park, you drive, so you put gas in your car, you use ride share, you go to a restaurant before, you maybe go to the bar after. So there's so much secondary spending that happens, and all those organizations that benefit from arts consumption helped the economy to grow, not to mention the tax dollars from all the jobs. I think our state had 71,000 jobs in the year before the pandemic. All of that is good for the economy. There's communities where you put a theater in there, you put a concert hall in there, all of a sudden then pops up a grocery store. So the arts can really, really sort of help build an economy. So I've been thinking about this cultural economic plan. So far, 6 points are popping up. One, I think, is diversity, because the more diverse we can, there are lots of people that aren't invited in our spaces that love arts and culture. So if we can really diversify and build our organizations from being either predominantly white or predominantly one race to being predominantly multicultural, then we'll open our doors to a lot of paying customers. There's the long-term plan of investing in arts for young people and arts education. That may not have an effect on the economy now, but in 5, 10, 15 years, those are the arts leaders and arts patrons and artists, right?
For sure.
I think given COVID, we might need to do some investment in outdoor infrastructure for performances so that people can gather safely. So anyway, I'm working on all this to think about what it could do, but I definitely think that if we can build a plan and use some of the brilliance that we have in this state that are outside of the arts, like all the entrepreneurs and futurists and social scientists to help us really think together about what this could all look like, we could come away with something really, really exciting.
And not to mention public health, right? Because we're a state with such a track record and all the great, thinkers in public health, right? In our state. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the Culture RX program, which is something that MCC has put into the world. And maybe you could tell us a little bit about it and how it has any of that thinking developed in relation specifically to the pandemic and what it means coming out of the pandemic.
Yeah, so Culture RX has a couple of different components to it. One is this sort of card to culture, which is kind of a discount card or freebie card that people that are in need can use to get discounts or free tickets to different arts and cultural organizations. And Mass Cultural Council will reimburse the venues or the cultural institutions that gave those discounts. So that's one component. So we're getting people that maybe aren't used to going to the arts to go to the arts. The second part, and the part I think is really exciting, is sort of the cultural prescriptions. Mm-hmm. So like when you go see a doctor, he says, hey, you have this ailment. I'm going to prescribe this medication for you. What this program did, and Anita Walker, my predecessor, found out about this program in London and she brought it over here. And I think it's a brilliant program. Mm-hmm. But what this does is says that if you go to a doctor, maybe they'll prescribe going to a cultural event or participating in a cultural exercise to help you with whatever you might be ailing with. So if you can imagine someone who maybe needs to get more physically fit, maybe their doctor prescribes dance lessons. Or someone who is suffering from depression, maybe they prescribe going to a museum. So the scale up version. So what we do is when those are prescribed, then the Mass Cultural Council will reimburse the user for the expense they had. The scaled up version is for us for insurance companies to add this as a benefit to their insurance packets, so that we are using culture to help people get healthy and happy and to fix ailments. And I think it's another way, again, that the arts can really, really, really support a lot of people in all the things that we're dealing with.
Especially the kind of healing that I think we're going to need coming out of all this isolation. I mean, everything you're reading about increased rates of depression and anxiety that are completely understandable coming out of all the traumas that we've been through. So I've been thinking a lot about that. Like, what is the role of the arts in this moment? And I wonder, I'm so interested to hear how you're thinking about governmental policy, right? Because your role has always been in the trenches of making theater and running an institution. Do you have any insights now, sitting in this new role, of how we who are in the trenches of artistic institutions and making art should be more engaged and involved? I mean, you've made the leap, so you're kind of, by model, sort of going through this connection. And I wonder if there are ways in which we as artists and artist leaders and arts practitioners should be thinking about our relationship to.
Yeah, sure. I don't know how, and I don't know why, but my brain has always been blessed with the ability to think conceptually and strategically and tactically at the same time. So for me, I spend a lot of time thinking about what is the idea, what is the concept, what is the strategy we're trying to solve. And then once I have that figured out, then we can figure out what all the tactics are. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing. So part of it is how do we message to legislation that we are a massive industry? I mean, they know it because, $878 billion from the cultural sector put into the GDP. That's more than transportation. That's more than agriculture. That's more than construction. It's huge amount of money that arts and culture puts into the budget every year. How do we help them understand that means we need as much investment in that is a big sort of thing that we have to think about. I don't have the answer yet, but I'm going to figure it out and maybe think with all the other intelligent people that are even outside of the sector that we can collaborate with. I also think arts leaders have to set aside time in their weekly schedule to think about what can they do to help advocate for the larger sector, because all of that will make a difference. Everyone wants to be with the arts leader, so it's a good platform to have. I also think there should be an advocacy committee on every single board committee. I think there should be a agenda item at every board meeting about advocacy, at your staff meeting about advocacy, is what we all can do to support that. We certainly can write letters. We certainly can support our advocacy partner, Mass Creative, but all of us need to have our voices heard and to build relationships. Strongly believe in building relationships. I think people like to do business with people they know. So the more you get away from your desk when it's safe and go out there and meet them where they are, the better relationship you're going to have. And really making time for that, I think, is all part of it. But I want to put some more thought to it's a strategic issue that we need to kind of solve to figure out how to make arts more visible in the state and in the country.
It's so my brain is thinking, because I'm wondering, with those stats and that data of the amount of money that's in our industry, is it the culture wars that stops our sector from getting the investment, that perhaps it deserves? And then, so that was one thought I was having. And then two, I was thinking the advocacy is also on the impact it's having on audience. So I'm wondering how we activate audience. I was just watching this documentary the other day called Brooklyn Castle. It's from 2012. It's a documentary about a public middle school in New York City that has the I think the country's leading chess team. It's an extracurricular chess club, and it's remarkable, right? They take their students to the nationals. They go to Texas. They travel all over the country, and these kids are transformed by not only their exposure to chess and the club, but what the opportunities that are given to them. And so in the documentary that came out in 2012, it's tracking the life of this one school in 2009 and 10, right after the economy crashed. And so their budget gets slashed. So this is kind of the drama in the documentary, is that the assistant principal comes in and says, well, we were just cut $300,000, and we can't take anybody to the nationals this year. And then what do? They go to the PTA meeting and they talk to the parents.
Yep.
And they get every parent to write their representative to say, do not cut from our school. How dare you? We should be the last thing to be cut. And then the students create a walkathon, and they raise $35,000 or something, and they get the money back. The state reverses the cut. I mean, it was just such a great example of kind of organizing and advocacy. And I don't know if it's that we don't feel that return, or what is it that it stops? I mean, I think, there's lots of people participate in advocacy, but I wonder if it's also, how do we get it inside the audience, right? Because the audience is the partner to this.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a link there.
I mean, I always believe these big sort of changes require a massive cultural shift. I think we're seeing that in the anti-racism movement.
Yes,
we've all created policies, we've all created programs to address it, and none of them have actually fixed the problem.
Yeah.
But now we're seeing a cultural shift where if you say something that dehumanizes someone else, you're going to get called out. You're going to be subject to the cancel culture. It's going to be a big thing. So that's a massive cultural shift. And maybe that's what we're talking about in this way too, that in order for us to really be seen and heard, we have to find better ways to organize and hold those groups that are created to help us organize and give us tools and figure out how to do it. But you're right. You see it like get together, write letters, have a little bit of a going to the public square, and then people sort of change. I also wanted to say that this is sort of the interesting thing I think about why the arts is important. And it's different than quality of life or the sort of health and human service aspect or the economic driving force that we have. But I just think that the world progresses because of art. And what I mean by that is that imagination is seeing the world different.
Yes.
Creativity is bringing imagination to life. Art is the product of creativity, and artists are the bringers of art. And so if we want the world to progress, we have got to invest in creative thinking, and we have to get the kids involved in it before they're 8 or 9 years old, because there have been so many studies that said if you don't get them involved before that age, they will never become the kinds of arts lovers and arts patrons or artists that you want. So that to me is the big part of it. All the ideas that we have about any kind of new progress comes from someone having the idea. And that means you have to cultivate creativity. I remember when I was teaching in universities, I spent more time teaching people about how to tap into their creative or imaginative processes versus here's this technique, let's become an expert at this technique. Because to me, you don't have the tools to expand and think about all the different ways you can solve those problems. And I think actually in many ways, that is a thing I've been sort of preaching about a little bit when it comes to what recovery looks like post COVID, because I a lot of my colleagues and your colleagues are ready to get back to normal and get back to doing theater the way theater used to be. But I don't know if that's going to happen. And I don't think, I think it'll be a hybrid. There may be some live, there may be some digital, there may be a beautiful moment where they cross-pollinate. But when technology happens, we never go back.
Mm-hmm.
Like no one's using 8 tracks and no one's using iPods. Everyone has moved forward with it. And so as we have learned to move into this digital world, and I also think that we haven't really embraced all the creativity that the digital world has to offer. There's still a lot to be mined. I was telling Sarah before we popped on that I think about what the sporting industry did with when they started streaming into people's homes. The experience you have at home is vastly different than the experience you have in the stadium. And the experience at home is so visceral and so multi-layered. You can do slow-mo, you can do data crawls, you can pop up bios, you can have colorful commentary, you can draw on the screen, all these different things. And I can't imagine what would happen if we were able to incorporate that into theater or dance or museum tours or the symphony, and what that would be for our patronage. That's different than seeing it live. So innovation, using the skills that we have of being creative people, much of that will help everyone recover and make, I think, the arts and culture even more important in this country.
Yeah, I'm so with you on the hybrid form, and the accelerated ways in which technology has. Wait, am I frozen again?
A little bit.
Oh dear. Okay, sorry about that. Internet's been fine all morning. Sorry, folks. I'm just so with you on the opportunities for the hybrid in our industry, because we've seen this accelerated appreciation and use of Zoom and all the kind of live streaming possibilities and what that means for access. I mean, I even wonder, there's certainly in the Culture RX program, the needs to be in person and to be with others, right? That's part of what the theater can provide. But even the prescriptions that could be written for things that could be delivered to folks via technology.
Correct.
Into hospitals, into places where, for people who can't get to the theater, to increase that access. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I wonder too, like in a couple of years after we get back, there certainly will be an attempt to do it the way it used to be done. But I wonder how long that will last before it starts feeling like a throwback. You know what I mean? Like people,
I know.
If I see someone with a CD, I'm like, what is that? So
I know.
So I think we have to embrace it and then do what we do well, which is to embrace it and then take it to the next level.
I think what's going to be hard, Michael, because we're thinking about this at the ART. First of all, there's the first thought of like, well, the digital and all this technology, it will never replace the theater. So yes, there will always be live theater, but it's the hybrid that you mentioned, which I think is where we all need to focus. What's tough about it is that it needs resources, to actually take advantage of your now digital arena, your digital platform, your digital audience. It's like running another venue, right?
Yep.
With different rules, different skill sets, different attention in terms of what you're tracking, the data. And I think it's a wild west of what that is, but it's, I think the challenge for a lot of theaters is, we're all struggling just to figure out the old model of how we used to get our revenue and get people to buy tickets, but it's a leap. It's right. If we could figure it out, because the possible additional earned revenue in terms of the business model for theater, the big strategy of how do we increase our audience, especially when you're running a small theater where your capacity is limited, right? There's such potential there.
Exactly. The capacity is limited. So that model, which we know has been strained for years, and we're also like completely vulnerable to it now. Who knows when there will be a new strain of COVID that may pop up that may close us down again. So that to me is more of a risk than not investing in this other thing, this investing both time and resources and finding the resources for that. I mean, what happened with sports now, it has this national brand and you get all these major national sponsors because you can reach so many people. But mark my word, we're going to see every theater having a streaming platform. Remember way back when websites came out, we were like, no, we don't want a website. We'll just keep making brochures, right? So we'll have streaming platforms. Yeah. Every theater is going to be installing cameras and small little TV studios and hiring a team just to do that aspect of their organization. Not just theaters, but arts organizations in general. It is not going back.
It's not going away.
Yeah.
I love that you say that with that kind of imagination of what it's going to feel like, when it just becomes norm, right? I always think about these Zoom webinars, like the one we're on. Mm-hmm. These remind me of like early days of cable. Remember when there was early cable and it was so raw and so like studios and the technology wasn't, very glamorous. Like, people are going to look back at the kind of webinars that we're doing today as sort of like, oh gosh, it's, the cameras, the technology, the quality, everything is going to change so rapidly. I wonder if we can pivot, because you did talk about this concept of cultural shift as well as policy shift, and thinking about these dual pandemics that we've experienced of COVID-19 and systemic racism, and in particular, I mean, you've been such a leader inside racial equity issues and how to live them in policy in your life as an artistic leader, and I'm wondering if you could speak more about that tension, right? Of the need for policy, the need for structure, the need for change that is not just a performative act, and yet the cultural norm setting, right, is this whole question of, are you going to change people, or are you going to change policy, or are you going to do both? And maybe you could speak to that a bit.
Yeah. Anyone that's living on this planet, especially in this country, anyone alive that's not maybe 5 years and older, has already been put into this culture where one group of people is considered better than another group of people. And that's like the beginning of shifting. We have to like change the idea that we're all the same and no one is better than another. And that's a hard thing, because as a Black man, I can't walk down the street not being aware of my Blackness. What I mean about the culture, so it's going to take those people 10 to 15, 20 years before their brains, hearts, and minds will fully shift to understanding that. And that's going to be a constant reminder of this cultural shift. But similar to what you all did in the beginnings, you have this sort of community agreement where you are saying, here's what we will not tolerate. And those of you that do not believe this, are not welcome to be a part of this organization. That is what it's going to take for these kind of shifts to happen. So, and that to me is a cultural thing, because we've all done the thing where we produce shows about people of color, but it doesn't change racism in our organization. We've all those are things where we've done discount tickets to disadvantaged communities, but that doesn't change the racism. And this racism word is a very sort of, it's an inflammatory word. It gets people really upset. But I want to take the emotion out of that word and just have people know it is what it is. So one of the ways I talk about it is that all the brown and Black people that I know love arts and culture a lot. It's inherent in who we are. We grow up with it. It's just part of who we are. But most of our institutions are predominantly white, and they were designed to be that way. Not to say that the people who designed it are bad people. It's just they had bias, they had preferences. And so they hired white people to build business models for white people. And so there are all these people that don't feel like this organization is for us, even when they do a show that invites them in. The only way to fix that is to have multicultural people build a new multicultural model. And that means a lot of people have to let go of some things that they were holding on to as theirs or as top. In the arts world, we have uplifted certain forms of art as the pinnacle. Like in theater, we say Shakespeare is the pinnacle, right? That devalues all the other forms of theater that are out there. We say that theater started in Greece. That's the idea that we have, that we promoted, but we know that's not true.
Yeah, forget theater. Democracy started in Greece.
Exactly.
Yeah, let's talk about, the indigenous tribes in America and the way they worked, and the kind of idea of tribes that had their own autonomy and yet they were coming together. I mean, those models of democracy not being elsewhere, not just in ancient Greece.
Yeah, I'm reading this book, Caste, right now, which I'm rereading, I should say. But I love the metaphor she uses, which is that we all bought a really old house that has a broken foundation and leaky roofs and distorted pipes. And we are living in that house now. And if we don't do something about it, then the house is going to fall on top of us. So even though we didn't create it, it is our responsibility to fix the house. And that requires a lot more than just a few policies and a few programmatic changes. It goes back to the culture. All of your action steps should be based on how, in the end, when I complete this action, how will the culture have shifted to make sure that we're moving forward into an anti-racist world. And the reason why I tell people they need action plans is that if you've ever been cheated on, you become hypervigilant. You want to know, like, where you're going, who you're talking to, let me see your phone, why are you talking to him, what time are you going to get home? You just become hypervigilant because you need to know that their actions are proving that they will never cheat again, right? They can say to you, honey, I will never cheat on you again, 1,000,000 times. But if their actions don't show that, it doesn't mean anything. So organizations that are putting out solidarity statements and Black Lives Matter or Stop Asian Hate, if there is no action to follow that, it is not engendering trust. It is not doing what people think they're going to do. And so that's one of my other big lessons. Like, build your action plan, build it and promote it. Let people know you're really serious about that. And also, when you say zero tolerance, you have to mean it. I mean, at New Rep, I think I kicked out about 8 or 9 patrons that didn't believe that Black Lives Matter. And I'm like, I'm a Black man running a theater. Maybe you shouldn't, you can't come to my theater. I mean, if you don't believe my life matters. But that's the kind of sort of zero tolerance that we have to have. And that's a shift in culture. That's what we need to really pivot this whole movement.
Yes. It's also the opportunity to come back in a new way. And, this disruption has afforded time, I think, through all its difficulty, for at least for us at the ART to really interrogate, as you say, practice that has existed for years, and to just look at the house and look at the foundations and understand, why things are the way they are, and that, when you said you need resource and time for advocacy, this is also about time and resource and prioritization, isn't it? It's, how are you prioritizing this focus in your institution? And I think that's something that we're all looking at as we contemplate reopening, right?
Sure.
How are we going to, it's a balancing act, right? Because we're all eager to be back and we all need to survive as theaters. But there's a long-term, long view, as you say, that we all have to be part of, that we're all playing a role in, that is not about, the short-term gain that could do more harm, right? Than the long-term shift,
Exactly.
long-term transformation.
I get it. Like the arm has been cut off and we're bleeding profusely. And it seems like if there's a handful of Band-Aids there, it seems like let's use the Band-Aids. But we really need to think about, like, how do we stop the bleeding from the arm and think about rebuilding the arm? And that's a longer term way of thinking. It requires more strategy and time and space. I also really believe that missions of organizations have to change when the world needs you to do something different. March of Dimes was created to find the cure for polio. Once the polio was cured, they couldn't continue doing the same thing. They had to pivot and come up with something else. And right now, the world needs us to end racism and needs us to recover from COVID. Those are the two most important things. And how can we incorporate that into the aesthetic of the work that we're doing as arts organizations and advance it on a scale that no one's ever seen before? So we don't have to deal with it again.
I know exactly. Like, what are we doing if not that? I mean, I'm wondering how that position that you just articulated is being received in, the new role that you're in government. Is that, do you feel people are hearing this? Are they open to it? Do they understand it? Is there education that needs to happen around this, or?
Yeah, so
where is that?
Yeah, we're right in the midst of the advocacy campaign. I can tell you internally, I have this amazing staff at Mass Cultural Council, and I've grown very fond of them in the 8 weeks that I've been there. It's hard to believe it's only 8 weeks, but they're all for it. I mean, the organization did a lot of anti-racism learning and work prior to it, and now we're going to advance it in an anti-racism plan that we're going to be starting next month. Certainly responding to COVID, there's been a number of CARES Act grants and pivoting of grants that we had before that we changed. We're advocating a lot right now for this sort of support. There's one, how do we help fill the buckets that have been emptied with sort of stabilization money? How do we also move forward with the money that we got last year? So we're advocating right now. The couple of things I want to mention is that our governor has suggested a small cut to our budget, but it's 10.4% of a cut. So we're not only pushing for us to maintain what we had before, but actually bump it up. So right now we're advocating for $20 million. So we're talking with and meeting with members of the House Ways and Means Committee to help us support that. We're also going to be advocating for some bond bill money to look at technological upgrades for people in the digital world, but also capital campaign costs for people that have to put in HVACs and other things to help their institutions become COVID safe.
Healthy buildings.
Yeah, healthy building. And the biggest thing is Senator Kennedy has put in a bill to get $200 million from whatever money we get from the federal recovery plan to go to arts and culture. So whatever money, it's not coming out of state tax dollars. We're trying to get this from the federal money. We're asking for $200 million. We put out a couple of weeks ago, we learned from the 981 organizations that filled out our survey that we have had a loss of $588 million plus. So this $200 million will help that. It's not going to fix it, but it will help that somewhat. So all of these different pots of money we're going for, we need people out there. If you're so inclined or not inclined to write your legislation and just say, do whatever Michael Bobbitt asks you to do.
Listen to Michael Bobbitt.
Exactly, we need it. But all of that's going to be a big part of what we're doing. And so I'm just on this circuit with the team at Mass Cultural Council. I have this fantastic director of external affairs, Beth Ann Steiner, who's really, really, really helping me understand and also help me focus the messaging and the campaigning. So we'll need everyone's help on that.
No, fantastic. Thank you for lifting those. I'm looking at the clock. Sarah, do you want to rejoin us? I see it's about 15 minutes. If we have any questions from folks that have been listening.
And we do. And just right up front, I want to acknowledge we're not going to have time to answer everyone's question. And I apologize. I'll do my best to sort of consolidate threads that I see trickling throughout multiple questions. So without further ado, Michael, I have a question for you. And this is me combining two questions. So apologies if you're hearing your submission a little Frankenstein here. But Michael, you've spoken in the recent past about sort of moving away from a subscription-based model. And I'm wondering if you would have any advice that you could share with leaders who are attempting to break down these barriers by eliminating subscription and membership models, but they're finding that they're incredibly cash-strapped. So do you have any advice for sort of balancing the needs of the drive of capitalism with trying to be a little bit more anti-racist and anti-oppressive by eliminating subscription and membership models?
Yeah. So the idea behind the subscription models is that model, and I will also say that I think in the performing arts, we do hold on to things that were designed way back when, and many of us will acknowledge that they don't work, but we still keep doing them, keep perpetuating them because we haven't designed new models. But the issue with this, there's many issues with the subscription model, and I won't bore you with all, but the biggest issue is that you have to think about the people that have the money to buy a year's worth of tickets 6 months in advance and what privileges we're giving them just because they have money. I know that at New Rep and the other theater I ran, you got first dibs at the seats, right? You have to pick the best seats in the house. And then if you weren't a subscriber, you just had to pick the leftovers. So that is something that holds racism in place. And so how do we let go of that model so that everyone has the chance to sit up front? I know at New Rep, we were considering general admission seating, in addition to changing to a new membership model, which was somewhat based on the New Rep, the Netflix model, which I thought was a really great thing that the staff sort of came up with. The other issue is the cash flow model, because that subscription thing is really in many ways for cash flows.
Right.
But if you think about that is an unstable thing, because if I'm getting all this money in this fiscal year that's supposed to be used for next fiscal year, and I'm spending it when it comes in, God forbid there's a flood or a fire or a pandemic. I've already spent all your money. And so it doesn't really make sense. And then the way it ties into your annual budgeting. So it always frustrated me. And there was two things. One is that I would never, if another theater asked me to direct or choreograph, I would never do the final show in the subscription season. Because if the first couple of shows in your season tank, then you're trying to balance the budget by cutting from the rest of the season. And so that last show is like a big old musical with no money to produce. So that whole thing is not good. If you have a hit show, you can only extend it for a week or two. You can't extend it like a commercial model and just keep extending until ticket sales go down. And on the flip side of that, if you had a flop, you can't close it early because subscribers have bought tickets on the last week of the run. So that whole thing just needs a whole new model. I don't know if the Netflix model is the model, but there has to be something out there. This is why I always say, we have got to talk with people that are outside the industry, because most of these things are being designed by people in the industry, and we need to hear from other people, entrepreneurs, business people, to kind of vet some of these ideas. But I know that there was a pay-it-all option with the Netflix model that I think would have helped the cash flows. I still think it's that sort of a tenuous model and maybe should be rethought. But anyway, that's my answer.
I love that. It's not one or the other, actually, as well. There's so much nuance as to one doesn't preclude the other in terms of how you're thinking about your business. So even just encouraging to think about new business models.
Yeah.
New business models.
Absolutely. This is me again trying to sort of coalesce a couple questions into one, so forgive me. But we've got some folks who are sort of asking us to talk a little bit more about this digital and in-person hybrid model of theater and arts moving forward in the pandemic. Very specifically, I have a couple of people asking for your perspectives on what new role that social media could play in this hybrid model beyond just straight up communication. So how might this person's asking about TikTok, which is a great new app that I myself am very fond of and is generating a lot of buzz in the musical theater world. But how could Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and those things support this hybrid model in a way that's not just about communication?
Well, those communication tools are primarily used by younger audiences. And that is one of the demographic that we all say we really want to engage, yet we do the bare minimum to actually engage them. I actually think when we get back in the theater, we should have cell phone allowed performances, not talking on your cell phones, but people should be tweeting and posting about what they're seeing because it's a great marketing tool. And so if you have one or two performances set aside where people can do that, I think you'll probably start seeing. At one point, I was thinking about the quiet car model, so that people that wanted to see theater or see entertainment the way they like to see it can have this performance on this night to have a quiet car. But anyway, I think those kinds of innovations are going to happen anyway. So I wonder how we can get on top of it. But one of the things I think we can do if we look at this streaming model and look at the sports analogy, and the fact that way back when we were consuming sort of this kind of platform, it was one thing. But now if you go to TikTok and Instagram Reels, the screen is filled with all this other stuff. And so our brain has somehow shifted to being able to absorb lots of information. And so how can we include that into the work that we're doing? I just imagine seeing like a symphony being performed and the camera zooming in on the trumpeter so we can see the trumpeter's fingering. And then maybe it cuts to the rehearsal of the trumpeter practicing, or we see stats about the trumpeter and how many years he's been with the symphony. I just think all of that kind of stuff could happen. Or we can have a Twitter feed on the side where people can say, oh my gosh, Stravinsky's Firebird Suite is my favorite orchestral piece ever. Just whatever we can do to embrace where we're eventually going, so that we can, I think we're fighting it and we're not teaching it in school and, all those kind of things. So I think there's opportunities out there that we need to explore.
And it's community building too. The opportunity to connect. I know when we did our Jagged Little Pill live stream, part of what made the live stream exciting was the contact that fans were having with each other in real time while they were watching the live stream. That was what made it special.
Yeah.
Taking advantage of all of that and, embracing it. I'm smiling when you say, like, you believe cell phones should be allowed in theater, because when I first came to ART 12 years ago, I thought we should allow cell phones in the theater. I thought the same as you. Like, that's how every other live event, when you go to a rock concert, you have your cell phone on, you're taking a picture of it, you're taking a picture of yourself there, and then you're putting it out in the world and you're marketing about it. And so, that's a cultural shift that has to happen for that to happen in the theater.
I did a production of Schoolhouse Rock.
Oh, yeah.
Start learning politics, by the way. Schoolhouse Rock. I'm just a Bill.
Yeah.
But I had the cast out roaming around and with the audience before the show, and cell phones were allowed. We did it like a live rock show. So there were jumbotrons, and we actually gave them hashtags and stuff. But we let the cast take pictures with the audience members. They were able to post the whole show, and that show sold out in a week.
I know. Sometimes what I think about, Michael, is that we have these rules for the theater that apply across the board. But there's so many different kinds of theater, like what you were just describing. Like, that's fully appropriate to have your phone on. That's part of the experience. There might be another theater event where you don't want phones and you're quiet and you're concentrating and you don't want that chatter going.
Yeah, and I think people will respect those different styles almost.
Exactly. If we can be more proactive about understanding there's different kinds of theater, different events with different modes that technology can be used. So it's not one size fits all.
Yeah, it'll be exciting soon. People will come around. They're not going to have a choice, but it'd be nice if we can get ahead of it now, especially while we're in crisis.
Yeah.
I've got a question that sort of, I think, relates to the conversation or the direction this conversation has taken. And we have someone who's wondering if there's anything you think that, quote unquote, mainstream or adult theater could learn from theater specifically intended for young audiences.
Oh, so much. So much. I mean, one dramatization in children's theater can be a small event that just gets dramatized into a big event. I always tell people when I commission playwrights that learning how to tie your shoe is a major dramatic event for a child, and you can write 5-hour play just based on that. So the second thing is that this rigidness of the audience that I found so refreshing as a theater for young audiences builder, that the audiences just respond in a visceral way. And I think when we think about even Shakespeare time and Greek time, that's kind of what it was. It was interactive. And so for some reason, we made it very staid and very quiet. So that aspect, I think, is pretty amazing. I also think that there really wasn't a diversity problem in theater for young audiences. If I had a family of mice on stage, I could have a black dad, a white mom, an Asian child who are all mice, and the audiences just bought it. They didn't question it. It was just, that's the mom, that's the dad, which is like my family, by the way. Like that's how we look. So, but I mean, I think that there are rules and there are no rules. And I actually one of the things I appreciate about Diane's work, especially on Pippin, is that you broke the rules. You were like, this is what it is, and so audiences can go along with that. Which I think is exciting. I also think that we have a shorter attention span now because so much stimulus is coming so fast. And I think TYA, they tell their stories in 45 minutes to an hour and 10, which I think is something that the audiences are excited about now. They can get in and still go to dinner after the show. Many things. We could do a whole webinar on that. I'm supposed to correct something too. I'm sorry. I got a text from staff. We do not reimburse cultural organizations for the free or dramatically reduced admissions they provide as part of Culture. This is entirely voluntary to increase cultural access. Thank you, Mass Cultural Council staff on that direction. I'm still learning.
We love the corrections for it.
Before you get flooded with phone calls saying, how do we participate in that program?
Yeah.
I love that. I love that learning from young people. And again, it's like not assuming that theater has to be one way. And it's also a lot of what you described is taking advantage of what the power of theater is. Right back to these things we talked about, the imagination, seeing things in ways that we never thought we could see things before, which is so natural to young people, and such a place that the theater can occupy and exist in, and what we can uniquely do in the theater, right?
Yeah, and we're also good at it. I mean, I have a love for theater. I grew up in the dance world as a at one point I wanted to be a ballet dancer, but also as a classical musician. But there was something about theater that was unlike those other forms, because a playwright can have an idea and sit down and write something, and a few years later, this whole world can be there. And so I just want to really push people to say, what does this world look like that is anti-racist, that has an economic boom, because we have taken this challenge right now and redefined our nonprofit business model and redefined what audience engagement looks like and redefined what theater looks like. What does that look like? And let's theater people put our heads together and build that and design that, because we are really equipped to make it actually happen.
Amazing. That's a great message.
I was going to say that might be the message to end on, right? Let's all take that away as our challenge, and to know we have a partner at MCC who's leading us with these kind of thoughts is really inspiring, Michael. So thank you for putting that challenge out in the universe, and being such an inspiring person inside our industry, and now inside our government. Yes.
Thank you all for the vote of confidence. I mean, the notes and the cheers have just been really great. Certainly insecure coming from being an artist and arts, running an arts organization to running something like Mass Cultural Council was nerve-wracking, but I'm glad to know that people out there are rooting for me. So thank you so much.
Goodness, no one better for the job. So we are there behind you every step of the way. Thanks for making the time today.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Diane. Have a good week, everyone. See you next week on the lunchroom.
Take care.